looking for her very own sunshine. All alone in her fate. Many roads to travel time, but she don't mind.
See that song, you can hear it, like that voice of this lady. She's like just trying to get this information out to people to understand. But today I'm here with Al Penn, the notable Al Penn, who many places known, far in between. But we're going to be talking about some issues right now that everybody needs to understand and follow what Al's trying to do here in the Chicago Southland area to see if we can make some changes to impact this community and make sure people understand what he's trying to do. So, where are you from, Al?
Actually, I'm living in the city of Chicago, but originally I was born in Chicago Heights, Illinois. The first 11 years of my life I was raised there, and then in 1966, a year after the Fair Housing Act was approved by President Lyndon Johnson, we moved to Harvey, Illinois. And that was a changing time. I remember the fact that we were excited because most black people in Chicago Heights were kind of locked in toward the east side of the city, which was really the poor side of the city at that point.
Okay.
The housing stock was pretty old. It was an industrial town. And we moved to Harvey, and I automatically thought, we've made it to the big time. We were
I can see that.
rich.
I can see it now.
My parents
up here.
had to tell me, no, we're not rich. But that's the way I felt at the time I was 11 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 11. So where'd you go to high school?
Went to the great Thornton Township High School.
Thornton.
Yes, home of the Wildcats.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and you know, it's noted as an athletic school, football school, basketball school, track school.
Okay.
And it is probably the oldest high school out in the Southland, in the south suburbs.
Got it.
So it's approximately now about 125 years old.
A lot of track record.
Yes.
Did you play any ball?
Played basketball my freshman year. I ran track all 4 years. We placed third in 1974 in state. I ran the 440 relay.
Okay.
And it was a fun time, but you know, when you leave high school, life begins.
You didn't decide to play pro, huh?
No, but you know what's interesting? I left college. I went to Thornton Community College, as it was called then, and now it's called South Suburban. And I went to Governor State, and I got a degree in broadcast communications.
Okay.
And summarily, I had a gentleman when I was in the banking industry who remembered me from my days at Thornton and asked me, could I help him cover the Chicago Bulls? And this was around 1990. I said, sure. So I'm thinking, what do I got to do? He says, well, you know, I have a radio show. And, you know, he would come into the bank and we would talk about, you know, Jordan and Scottie Pippen and all of that. And he said, you know, just come meet me at the stadium. And he had a credential for me. And I covered the Bulls for 12 glorious years.
Gosh.
Yeah.
In the heyday.
In the heyday.
Did you get an autograph from all the gang?
I didn't get an autograph from everybody. I got a few autographs because, you know, they don't encourage
At least
you
a
to do that.
championship ball.
Well, I do have a championship ring.
Okay.
I do have that. But it was totally discouraged that you would try to get autographs. But, you know, some of the players were gracious. You know, Michael Jordan was gracious. Scottie Pippen was gracious. Give me an autograph that I still hold to this day. You know, they gave it to my son, so I keep it in a safe place now. So, yeah.
Now, son, how old is your son?
My son unfortunately passed away in 2008. Had he lived, he would be 40 this year.
Oh.
Yeah, so he died about 15 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different world. I'm dealing with a 15-year-old now, so I'm like, okay, what are you going to do with this 15-year-old kid? She's trying to drive me crazy.
Well, you know, teenagers, and I was one, teenagers every generation tend to think that they've got the tiger by the tail and they know what to do, and you really don't. I remember when my son went to college and he wanted to be an architect, and he just wasn't strong enough in math. And so I remember at the time he was going to graduate, and I knew he was not in the architectural curriculum, he said to me, "I got something to tell you." I said, "What?" Yes, I already know.
Dad.
He says, I'm getting my degree in education. I said, "Wonderful." And he exhaled. He thought I was going to be pretty upset with
Ticked
that.
off here. What are you talking
No,
about?
no, you're graduating. That's a milestone.
Right.
So we choose our paths sometimes vicariously because we think that that's something we want to do, and then we find out in some cases we're not just as good as we thought. But the whole idea is to find a pathway that's going to work for you,
Yeah.
that you'll be able to be successful, and you can chart your success as you go on through time.
Because that's what I'm going through now with this 15-year-old. She's saying, "What are you going to do?" "Well, I'm going to go to college. Let's look at Harvard. Let's look at Stanford." I say, "Wait a minute. Can we stay here in Illinois? Because right now, at least I teach at a few of these schools. I can get you a free ride."
Yeah, with the cost of college now, and with the advent of student loans on top of that, which I really feel bad for a lot of parents because, this country has a strange way of developing human capital. And so the way they do it is to create a bondage for these folks in order to get that intellectual capital that they need to have. And I think it's really unfortunate, and it's really held the country back in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because it's one of those challenges right now. I'm trying to make sure that she knows what she wants to do. She keeps saying, "Well, I'm going to be doctor and maybe supermodel." She just won Miss Teen Illinois.
Okay.
And, okay, cute girl, but hey, you still got to make sure you understand what you're trying to do here.
I understand.
And
Yeah.
I put her in contact with a lot of my medical clients. We have facilities that are available to make things happen for her if she wants to make that work. But you still got to understand, what is it that you really want to do?
Correct. And I told young people too, do what you love that you would do for free. Understand the possibility and the remuneration that you would get from it, but you would still do it for free.
Hey, it's like me when I was in high school, bass player. Hey, I loved playing bass.
Okay.
We do concerts. I thought, I'm going to be going, we got to get an album here. And of course, we got ready. And of course, my competition, Curtis Blow, gets the break. I thought we were going to have an album here, but did not work. So I had two options: get a record contract or go off to school. So from there, didn't get the contract, so fine, go off to Bradley and study finance, do things like that, and just call it a day.
There you go. Yes.
But other than that side, though, we got some interesting plans that you've created, and trying to get the education to people listening to this program today to find out what's happening here in Illinois, and what is it that you're trying to do that can help make this a better place.
Well, our group, which is Obsidian Consulting Corporation, we have come up with an idea that we think will boost the economy, not just in the Chicago South suburbs, but the Chicago metro region and as well as the state.
Okay.
One of the things that I was involved in as early as 2003 was the support of the South Suburban Airport. And some people call it the Peatone Airport, but the truth of it is that it is in unincorporated land in Will County. And as a former politician, I was on the Board of Trustees in University Park. We had the contract to build the airport if we needed to do that, but we wanted to have a consortium of communities, home rule municipalities in the Southland, that would partner with each other in order to build the airport. We would get something that came out of a program called the Illinois First Program, which the state would give back to municipalities in terms of money for roads and lights and all of that.
Okay.
And we would tell this, and this was under Governor Ryan, no, keep that money, use that money to purchase land in the footprint of the airport that we want. And so they would purchase land, and they went through that in terms of a condemnation process. And we went on to basically create plans to build a third airport. We had somewhere at that time, 20 years ago, about $500 million in money from two private developers that put money up to build the airport, and they backed that with $1 billion of revenue bonds from the Royal Canadian government. And so we were well positioned to build it, but politics kill the idea for the moment.
Yeah, because I'm trying to understand. Right now we got Midway, we got O'Hare, we got two big major airports. Why do we need a third airport?
Well, at the time, we thought that we needed strictly for economic development reasons, and that was true at that point. But as I've come to learn over the last several years, it was the right street, wrong address.
Okay.
Okay, meaning the right street, yes, meant an airport. Wrong address meaning instead of a passenger airport, we needed to go cargo. And the reason why we needed to go cargo, because there was more money at cargo, number one. Number two, it was also a better way to draw an industrial base back to the Southland, to give them a reason to help to support an airport. And so what we have been doing now in terms of Obsidian, we are looking at not just the cargo airport, we're not being involved in that, but we're looking at if an airport does come to the Southland region, what is it going to take to support that? And one of the things that we know that the region does not have, that many other areas that do have cargo airports all over the country, is something called cargo processing facilities.
What's that?
Well, Chicago has a processing facility for belly cargo in planes that take off at O'Hare.
Okay.
All right, but for cargo freight processing centers, what we're looking at is dealing with freight that comes off of trains, that comes off of boats, comes off of trucks, and basically having a facility where you're dealing with larger things now that can be assembled and then potentially shipped on at a cargo airport. And so with those things, if we had that in a situation where it was actually productive, it would make a cargo airport much more easier to do.
Because we're talking about cargo, talking about one of the largest amount of commodities that is transported throughout this country. Cargo is the main crust of what makes money roll.
Correct, correct. One of the things that many people might have to look at a little bit differently is that cargo comes in from nations that are out west, Asian nations.
Okay.
And they come through the upper northwest in terms of Portland and Seattle, and in some cases west, you're looking at LA and some places in Alameda County. Those issues, those items comes in to Chicago and then they're immediately redistributed and redispersed all over the country.
Okay.
In some cases internationally going east up the St. Lawrence Seaway out to Europe, in some cases Africa.
Got it. Now, right now, there's a lot of freight that's done throughout the country. Right now, we got some major ports, New York, we got LA, and these are all set up with these types of formats. But we're going to do something here in Chicagoland area, Midway, or the southern part of Illinois. How can that work over what's happening in the east and west coast?
Well, because again, Chicago has a history of being a transportation hub. Historically, during the Industrial Revolution, railroads, when they were built, converged in Chicago.
Okay.
At the turn of the 20th century, where trucking became magnified, it became a hub where trucks came in and out. At the advent of the interstate highway, it made it much more so easier because you had an interstate system to do that. And then when aviation came in, for the most part, it was accessible to people around the early 1960s. Then the advent of cargo transportation became magnified just as well. The way it works, for the most part, is that it comes in from all of these places. Chicago right now has what they call a bottleneck because cargo moves at about 9 miles an hour through Chicago. It's very slow.
Okay.
And because so much stuff comes here, we can't get it out quick enough. So what's been happening in and around Chicago and other places like Milwaukee and Memphis and Indianapolis, places like that, they've created cargo hubs to avoid coming into Chicago. So what Chicago now is missing somewhere around, $750 million each and every year in terms of lost revenue that they could have had or could have if they had developed the infrastructure to capture that type of volume. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at it right now as something that would be really intrinsic to Chicago based on its strategic location because we're the largest deep water port in North America, really in the world. Most of the cities that you're talking about in terms of New York and Houston and Miami, they're on the outskirts near oceans. Chicago is interior of the North American continent. And so there are only maybe a couple of other places in the world that are similar, and that is Singapore and Hong Kong. That's close to that. And so Chicago is in a very unique situation where this has just been, it's like as a kid, we used to walk down the street, and in 2024 it doesn't exist very much, but remember the days you walk down the street and you find $1 laying on the ground?
Yeah, hey, I found it.
This is what this is like. It's just available. You see it on the ground and you pick it up and you keep walking. But the real thing here is looking at transportation. Cargo transportation is a real economic generator that can really revive the South Side and the Southland as an economic engine.
Al, what you're talking about is multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar operations that are going to take place. Right now, this means a lot of jobs, a lot of revenue.
Correct.
A state that could basically balloon and say, hey, I got revenue that's coming in now, let's utilize this. So why are we not getting it done?
I think, and I'm not trying to attack politicians here, but sometimes politicians make the worst business people. You can't expect them to think like business people. And business people have to bring ideas to them that are very practical from a standpoint of really kind of engineering it forward and not making it a hard lift for them to do so. And then showing them the future of what it could be, but most importantly, solving a problem that's already present within industry. The big problem that has to be solved within the cargo industry is how do you move freight, particularly through the Chicago metropolitan area, and do it expeditiously and make it favorable to manufacturers and shippers, the like, so they can look at Chicago as being a friendly manufacturing and shipping hub like it once was back in the late 60s, early 70s, before globalization hit in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
So that's what you got to do. How do you make that as a tool for them to use? And we think we have something that is very, very likable for those particular industries.
So I'm on a communication beam that we send out communications to the governor's office, to the senator's office, and all around this country. Right now, Chicago's sitting on a format where they're using 9 mile an hour transports for different inventories. That has to stop, because right now we have job opportunities, a huge amount of wealth that come back to Illinois, the Midwest, and we need to utilize this. And right now, it's not going to be here forever. So right now, if you don't get it done now, it's going to be gone.
Well, that's one of the things why we keep talking about the urgency of the moment here, because things don't stay the same very long. And as I said before, you look at other locales around the country who've understood that bottlenecks are an albatross to economic development when you're dealing with cargo. And so this is why you see Alameda County in California. This is why you see major growth in Houston, Texas. This is why you see major growth in Memphis, in Miami, and going on in New York and other places, because they recognize that if we're a seawater port, we need to make certain that we utilize our infrastructure to do it. The only problem with Chicago is, or I should say the problem, is the issue of politics that stops it. And looking at the South Suburban Airport where it got stopped, the progress really slowed around 2010. There's been a revival now, but the real big concern for me is, do politicians really understand the cargo market? You know, do they understand what it's going to take to have it sustainable and to have that implemented over a time where now when you build the apparatus that it will self-sustain itself, you know, over a longer period of time? And that's the question mark for me, because Chicago should be at the forefront based on where it's strategically located right off of Lake Michigan, to be able to have the region benefit in a way that it creates middle-class jobs continually. You know, they should be able to grow continually. The fact that, you know, we have a port district here in Chicago, the Illinois International Port District, it's underutilized. You know, it's being allowed to decay, and to understand the strategic nature of what it brings to Chicago, I think is just being slept on to the point of really not understanding, what the Port District should be able to do.
Got it. Al, at least from what I'm hearing, we got a huge situation here that's on the table. And right now, I got a state right now that's taxing people heavily. We got multi-billionaires that got to leave the state because, hey, look, you guys are taxing us too much. And we got politicians here that are basically going to jail and all the other things because they're trying to get more money from people to squeeze. Is this kind of hitting the head of what's happening?
Well, people, when they hear about corrupt politicians, they naturally get angry. They get mad for the moment, and then they move on to the next issue of importance to them. Then they got to deal with, how am I going to educate my children, send them to college? How am I going to deal with the higher cost of food because it's getting more expensive? How am I going to deal with the property tax levies that are being imposed on me by my municipality that doesn't seem to get smaller and regress? And most importantly, the income I have is not keeping up with inflation. How are we going to survive? And so these are the questions that they have in their mind once they get past the politics and the issues of politicians. And I think the politicians become tone deaf to that point of not realizing that they have a conundrum on their hands in terms of they've got problems they have to solve. And really, it starts at the point of really, what do you do to develop industry? Not to tax people as much as you'd like to, because there's only so much money to go around that people have. So if you find opportunities within industries that will create middle-class jobs, pay fair wages, to make them available to people who don't necessarily have to have 4-year degrees, then what you do is create a system that people will be able to thrive in, and they'll be able to do some of the things that my parents were able to do. Send their kids to college, buy a home, buy a new car probably once every 4 years or so, and they feel satisfied with that capability and an opportunity to raise their families.
Got it.
Yeah.
So Al, I have a direct call line going into Senator Durbin. What am I going to tell him?
That's an interesting question. Senator Durbin has never been a real full-throated supporter of the South Suburban Airport. And I understand the reasons why, because he seeded the money for the Rockford International Airport to grow and to thrive. The Rockford Airport right now is one of your most profitable airports in the nation. They're growing at a rate of about 25 to 35% a year. And so supporters of the Rockford Airport will say, well, why do we need another cargo airport? It was the same argument about, a South Suburban passenger airport as it related to Midway and O'Hare. I get it, but because cargo is not stopping coming to and through Chicago, it's going to increase from about $750 billion to about $1.3 trillion in about 20-some years, about 26 years.
Okay.
So it's not slowing down. So the fact that it's coming into this area by rail, by truck, by water in some cases, the question is, if it's going to increase by about $300 billion in the next 20 years or so, how are you going to be able to handle that volume when you're not capable of handling this volume that you're dealing with right now?
Got it.
Yeah.
So, Al, to get this kicked off and done, what do we have to do?
Well, I think you have to convene the leadership at the table to say, this is why we need this. It's not just political leadership, but also it's industrial leadership, because they're the ones who stand to benefit the most, because they understand that the tools that are there to help them be successful is not available. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you don't solve a problem for industry, they're not interested in what you have to offer them. You got to be able to be a problem solver. Because it's a good idea doesn't mean that they're going to gravitate to that. You've got to be able to create a win for industry to say, I want to participate in it.
Got it. Now, I got industry that's rolling ahead left and right every day. I got Amazon, all the other people that are creating networks to get inventory and shipping done. What is it that's stopping you from making this happen?
Well, what's stopping me right now is folks got to have ears to hear, number one. about this issue. They've not paid attention to it. For example, some of the communities we talk about, one of which I grew up in, which is Harvey, Illinois. If you go down to downtown Harvey, right off of 159th Street or Route 6, you'll see container cars stacked on top of each other at the Canadian National line.
Okay.
Why is that important? It's because if they can't move the containers, they can't bring more containers in. They're at gridlock. And so you've got to be able to look at what is the pathway of least resistance to create a pathway for freight cargo to move in and out of Chicago seamlessly without interruption. This is why a freight cargo center, processing center, would be necessary, because what you would have is something in the area of a 2 square mile apparatus out in the Southland, in virgin land, that you can create, that you can funnel as much cargo into that area as much, and then create the actual apparatus for it to process it. Why is it so important in terms of looking at that is, one, that the cargo processing center will be located in a foreign trade zone. The foreign trade zone that I'm talking about is foreign trade zone number 22, which starts at the Illinois International Port District out near the Bishop Ford Expressway.
Okay.
But it extends 60 miles from the port, which means it extends as far south as the Des Plaines River. Far southwest is Joliet, another community. So what you could do is create an apparatus that would not just encompass the south side of Chicago or the south suburbs, but you're talking about a 60-mile radius, an apparatus that would benefit manufacturers and shippers and all of that to help create these jobs and move cargo much quicker than you have.
This is a fantastic idea, Al. My question is, why would our governor not want to have this thing pushed as quickly as possible?
Well, I don't think the governor has heard it yet. I have talked with the Speaker of the House, Chris Welch.
Okay.
I spoke with him a couple of years ago, and he looked at this and he said, this is the gift that keeps on giving. And he asked the question, how come nobody's talked about this before? I said, well, a couple of reasons. One, nobody's as smart as I am because I figured this out. But most importantly, a lot of times when African-American developers and entrepreneurs come forth with ideas, they're not taken seriously. And so they look at this as something as an outlier until they dig in the weeds with this. And so, you know, there have been a number of Southland legislators at the state level who've seen this and they like the idea. The Speaker of the House loves the idea. So it comes down to money. How do you get your idea funded and move forward? And so what we're in the process of doing right now is finding monies for a feasibility study and money for a framework plan to help move it forward.
Okay. How much you need?
To build the entire project, ideally we would need somewhere around maybe $250 million to do it.
Okay.
In terms of doing a framework plan and a feasibility plan, probably somewhere in the area of about maybe a couple $100,000 to do it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we get this feasibility study done. Where do we take the feasibility study to?
Oh, well, we take it to some place like the Department of Transportation.
Okay.
You know, they've had several studies that've been out over the last 18, 20 years about the issue of freight movement in Illinois and in Chicago. So they know this. If, you know, CMAP has talked about it, the Metropolitan Planning Council have talked about this many, many years, and they've not come with a real good structure or plan to help move freight. So they're the ones I would really take it to, which will be the Department of Transportation right off the bat.
Got it.
Then once you're looking at that, you got to look at who the beneficial partners would be. You know, there are two entities that would really want to see this because it's revenue not just, you know, in privatized organizations' pockets, but it's also money in the pockets of the government. And what do I mean by that? Because you look at places like New York. You talked about New York in terms of what they're doing there. The amount of business that they're doing in New York could be duplicated in Chicago. The only major difference is that the Port District and the state of New York are actually benefiting from all the activity. And the activity I'm talking about is the movement of goods and freight from trucks to trains to truck, movement from trains to truck to water,
Okay.
movement from trains to truck to air. It's an activity that has a quantification of cost on it. How much is the cost to take a lift from one modality to another? It's not a huge cost, but the volume of the amount of activity that generates that type of money makes it almost too good to ignore. And so if you do a comparative analysis in terms of the lifts that happen across the state that the state is not getting a dime from, and you quantify that in terms of what's going on in the state of New York and other locales across the country, the first question is, why aren't they doing that in Chicago? Why aren't they doing that in Illinois? I can't answer that question. I would highly recommend that they look at something like this because it would certainly benefit them and certainly benefit the idea over time that you would need an airport to give you that fourth modality to move goods and freight like that to do so.
So if we put these dollars together for you guys to complete this feasibility study, do we just cut a check to you guys, or what do we do?
Yes, they would cut a check to us and we would give them an actual product to answer the questions of the how, the whys, the what, and the next steps of implementation that we need to do.
Okay.
And certainly the state would have to undertake it and look at it to see if it's worth it to do it like that. We give financial projections in terms of how that is. And then, we go on a marketing tour, with people around the state. There would be state legislators. Certainly we would talk about, the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Senate, and certainly we would talk to the governor about it.
Okay.
The governor is a big idea person. The last time I talked to him, he said there was a lot of work that had to be done. And I agreed with him. There was a lot of work that had to be done. There's a lot of detail that had to be done. In this particular case too, one of the things that, and I got close to really kind of making the big leap with Mayor Lightfoot, but COVID hit. And so, as you can see with a lot of companies and a lot of industries, they've been fighting back from COVID to get back to the square one that they were when COVID came.
Got it.
I talked to her about it, and one of the things that she said to me is, well, how can we deal with an airport like this in this way out there? It's just very easy. Governments use this apparatus all the time. It's called an intergovernmental agreement.
Okay.
Just because it's not in Chicago don't mean Chicago can't control it. And those in the suburbs would look at me and say, well, why would you want the city of Chicago to control it? Because number one, they have the only intellectual capital of building and developing airports in the region of that magnitude. Number two, they are intrinsic to the operation of a processing center and the actual built infrastructure that would need to actually be done, meaning that you would have to have cargo processing centers, in the Southland, but you could create smaller hubs in the western suburbs, southern suburbs, even on the south side of Chicago. And three, it would take also partnership with the state, because the state has land in the footprint near the footprint of the airport to do so, and they would have the capability of being able to bond. So the city could bond, the state could bond, even the port district could bond. So you have to have the capability of being able to generate dollars to make a project like this possible.
Al, I'm looking at a big puzzle. I got a lot of pieces on the table, and right now we have dollars that are being generated all over the place. Basically, movement of cargo, getting it done quickly and properly.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, right now we got multi-billion-dollar corporations that want to have this set up to function effectively. Why are they not pushing to have this done?
Politics gets in the way sometimes unnecessarily. Okay, one of the things I learned about the political structure, even from small municipalities to the governor's mansion, is that there are people who like to take credit. And that's okay. I could care less about who gets credit, but they have to have the political will in terms of seeing a project like this be developed for the benefit of people and for the benefit of the state. The state should be always in the position of looking forward in terms of how do they develop their economies, how they create jobs that pay well, how to create sustainable communities that do things like educate your children and reduce crime. And the best way to do that is have a burgeoning economy that creates jobs and pay people well. Mm-hmm. But in the midst of that, there's an element of control within the political structure that slows things down. In some cases, it slows it down to an absolute crawl. And so when you look at a place like Chicago, which is founded by a black man back in 1845.
I heard that guy.
Yeah, who had the foresight to look at a town, or at least a place being put on the banks of Lake Michigan as a trading outpost. He had that foresight. Well, that foresight is still true, almost 200 years later. Chicago is in the middle of North America. It's the deepest inland water port in America, and everything comes here. But we haven't figured out how to capitalize on everything coming here to make it even a much more burgeoning and operational entity. And so when you talk about Amazon right now is shifting all of their cargo 100 miles north to Rockford. I'm not against Rockford. I want to see Rockford thrive because it's in the state of Illinois. Mm-hmm. But as I talk about another $300 billion that are due to increase over the next 26 years coming into the state and the region, the question is, how do we capture all of that? It's the same issue about an ever-growing O'Hare. You're not going to have an ever-growing Rockford Airport either. And people also should consider the possibility and capabilities of what even Gary can do to help fuel that apparatus, because mm-hmm. it's right next door to us, right across the border, right on the banks of the same Lake Michigan that Jean Point Baptiste du Sable created as an outpost. So the point is that there's a lot of interplay that can happen if politicians would sit down and look at this and say, hey, we can do a lot. It would help. Let me tell you what it would do. If you think about if you had an extra $750 billion that you can deal with, think about what would happen to pension obligations in every municipality in the state. It doesn't become that much of a problem anymore. Just think what you could do with your long-term and short-term planning obligations and plans mm-hmm. in terms of how you grow and how you build. It becomes a lot easier to do so. Let's say, if you're looking at just taxation, you don't have to worry about really putting the obligation of property taxes on homeowners and looking at how you're going to fund schools, and you've got oodles of money to potentially do that. Other locations have figured this out. Chicago just hasn't done it yet. The state hasn't done it.
That's not the normal frame of thought for the Chicago politics here. How do we get money? Do you tax it? Just keep taxing them. Go from there. That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
At least we want to make a comfortable environment for people to live.
Yeah.
So I'm coming back to you, sir. You put some things on the table right now that we have to say, hey, we need some assistance. We need to get this plan done. We need to get this to the right hands of people who can make this done and execute. Mm-hmm. And the question is a timeline. How much time do we have?
Well, we don't like to do things in concert with another project, but to give you an idea, there's going to be an RFQ that's coming out shortly from the state of Illinois regarding the South Suburban Airport. And if you build the airport, going back on the projections that we had back in the early 2000s where we were looking at doing that, it was going to take about 18 months to dig a hole and then make it operational.
Okay.
I would say probably a 2-year window, 2.5-year window would be apropos in terms of really getting a processing center actually done. Probably less than that, probably 18 months.
Okay, so we're saying we can do this in 18 months possibly.
Yeah, you can do that in 18 months possibly.
And then after this is done, we get the information in the hands of the right people and we start to get this thing implement and functional, meaning we got revenues that are coming in. We have transport that's set up now for all the needed inventory that need to get to where they need to get done. And then we have a better environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do.
What do we change this environment to? Does that mean we got jobs galore? We just don't have enough people? Bring in people from South America and try to get jobs and people?
Well, I think that's a very fair question. One of the things that we look at the type of jobs that it will provide, again, is middle class jobs that will require no more than an associate's degree for people to be employed. And so we look at the network of community colleges that we have that have now started to shift to teach industrial-based careers to. I mean, we have them all over the South Side. We have them all over the South suburbs. And, you know, to implement a jobs training program like that, one of the things that have always frightened me about even looking at the South Suburban Airport is, are the residents and is the public ready to be employed, to be hired at an airport facility? And my concern has always been no, because we haven't done anything like this before. And so it's somewhat the same thing in terms of cargo processing center. We haven't done anything like this before. But I would say we could start even in the high schools. I look at some of the high schools now in terms of STEM education that's in place right now, and even my alma mater has been involved in industrial-based careers where they have taught diesel mechanic repair in places like that. There are other programs across the city in terms of a program called Manufacturing Renaissance, where they teach young people the virtues and about manufacturing. And these young people start in their junior year of high school and get this kind of training, get certified, and they come out of high school, you know, making $60,000, $70,000 a year in today's marketplace.
Al, we're talking about something that's being done at other locations now. We got East Coast, West Coast. They are making this, they're monetizing this process, and we don't have it here.
Correct.
So why can't that serve as the example and say, look, you want it, we can get it done, this is the example, and it shows you it works?
Well, again, it goes back to solving problems and showing the right people this is the problem you solve. You solve this problem in terms of what type of labor pool does it create. Okay. Everybody wants to go to college, but there's a good segment of people who don't go to college. And this is one of the ways that we can show that it will serve that particular public. You know, you can probably come out of high school, maybe 1 year of college, or maybe a certification program that you can go through, and you can be ready to work in a project-based environment like this. If you're talking about really solving a problem in the industrial sector, you know, how do you move, you know, trucks and trains expeditiously through the region to be able to get them off the road and get them into an area where we can start to service, you know, freight cargo and get it moving? Well, certainly the creation of a South Suburban Airport does that, but also too having a freight cargo processing center which expedites that whole idea. So you have to really kind of emphasize the wins toward the audiences that you're talking to. And if you're able to do that, I think you'll be able to kind of get some people more moved toward the middle to say, hey, let's take a look at this and see what we can do with it.
So we're talking more jobs, like more truck drivers, we're talking more storage, cargo technicians, we're talking more inventory people. What's going to be the job?
Everything that you can think of in terms of moving goods. There'll be trucking, there'll be stevedores who take stuff off of trucks and trains at port districts. You're talking about logistics operations that will be able to grow and function. It just will just be an unimaginable boom in terms of jobs.
Not minimum wage jobs.
No, these are not minimum wage jobs. I was very fortunate right before the pandemic to be taken to Kansas City, Missouri, and there's a logistics company that's located in the Joliet area called North Point Development, and they saw our plan and they were highly excited about it. They took me out there and showed me everything that we're doing. And what does that really mean in terms of they were excited? Because when you think of development, industrial development, doesn't necessarily mean it starts and ends with that. Development now in the industrial sector really moves toward the service-based sector for communities. For example, in Kansas City, North Point not only built logistics centers, but they also saw the needs of other things that that location needed in terms of they needed medical centers, they needed a grocery store, they needed parks.
Okay.
And so they become a good faith partner in terms of building up some of those spaces in between that's not being dealt with. It's not just about them coming in and making money, but it allows them to be a good faith partner so they have a good relationship with the communities that the people are coming from that are working for them. Okay. And I thought that was a very unique approach in terms of doing development. And you just don't see many companies who do development really take that approach forward. And it's a holistic type of an approach where people now, where they go to work, but they also feel comfortable that, yeah, not only did they build the job that I have, but they built the senior housing that my mother's staying in.
Okay.
You know, they built the pharmacy and medical facility that my mother now gets her medicine from. They built the grocery store in the community because we had none. And now we have a great place that we can go buy great vegetables and produce and at an affordable price. So it's that approach of looking at how do you solve the problems of community needs. And I don't think the out of the box thinking has really taken hold, particularly in the Chicago metropolitan area, to do these type of things. You know, a lot of times I hear politicians say, well, let the private sector do it. That's okay. But the private sector also can contribute to the growth of the overall community's health too. And I think that's some of the things they've got to look at. So if they're going to build, if you're talking about building a processing center, certainly we can talk about other things too they can bring with it. For example, North Point, it's very close to Amazon. They have a working relationship, but they also had a close relationship with just about every Fortune 500 company in America. So now you have touch points that you can touch and say, hey, do you think you might be interested in doing something like this in a development here in this town? And what they did in Kansas City was exactly like that. And I'm saying, suburban Kansas City, it was small town America, and they brought these resources along with their major development. And the people were ecstatic about that.
Mm. And seeing this is something that can work.
Yes.
And that's the real format. Because right now we're just trying to give them reality.
Yes.
This is something that we can create,
mm-hmm.
make happen, jobs galore, and the community continues to grow.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's really all we want to try to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now we're talking about a future that's coming on. We got our growing baby boomers, and we're saying, hey, baby boomers can still be working in this format. It's not like their jobs are unavailable if you want to still work.
Mm-hmm.
And this can be done.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And when you're talking about cold storage spaces, logistic companies, you're talking about manufacturers. I remember back in the late 60s, early 70s, where the Southland was just a manufacturing and logistics haven. I mean, steel companies everywhere, manufacturing companies everywhere. They're all gone now because of cheap overseas labor.
Got it.
But there can be a renaissance in terms of that, and particularly with, the infrastructure bill that Congress passed and President Biden helped it get implemented a couple of years ago. It allows the growth of that to happen. I was very excited when he talked about revitalizing their ports and basically eliminating bottlenecks, which really spoke to my language in terms of doing that. Yeah, so you look at the money that has been expended, and it's still being expended out by the federal government. It's close to what happened in the mid to late 1950s when the interstate highway system was actually put in place. And why that was so important is because President Eisenhower looked at the national interstate system as a way of not just moving people to get one place to another quickly, but it was a place to look at goods moving quickly one place to another. Well, we've outgrown the interstate highway system now. So we've got to look at air as well as we got to look at rail. We got to look at all the modalities now in terms of, using it to its full capability to make it all work.
We got a situation right now. We have a problem. We've gone through a lot of time. And right now we got about 2 minutes left where we didn't get to show the actual data that you wanted to show on the screen. Is that something you still want to post up?
Yeah, I do. I would have to look at what there's a slide that I would like to show folks in terms of how this thing would actually work, and it's a slide that has a chart on it that has how the apparatus would work, and for your guys in the control room who are doing a magnificent job, it is, I don't know what slide this is, but it's a slide with a chart on it, and it has the city of Chicago. It's right before it says, let me go to, in terms of, it's right after President Biden. There's about a couple of slides I want to go through. It says Container Freight Cargo Processing Center, if they put that up. And basically, what does that really mean? President Biden talked about $17 billion he wanted to invest. And what the region really needs is about 2 miles of container cargo processing center facilities. And ideally, we're looking at near South Suburban University Park. You can place it in local hubs across the region and area. And we're looking at tens of thousands of dollars of jobs. If you go to the next slide, which says increased usage of the Illinois International Port, we're looking at that would drive the necessary need for a cargo airport facility, and it will increase usage of the port district. But as I talked about before, it's the foreign trade zone number 22 that's really important. And then if you go to 2 slides after that, you see a chart with the city of Chicago, the port district, and the state. If you kind of go forward with that, yes, that's the slide. This is the apparatus where you see the state and the city basically both control the port district. The city has 5 seats, the state has 4 seats. Okay. And so on the left side, you're looking at that municipalities would enter into a revenue sharing agreement, and that would be an intergovernmental agreement between the city of Chicago, Cook County, Will County, and the state. But also in the middle, what you would see is how the apparatus would work, is that there would be a cargo facility in the south suburbs. There actually not one, but 2, one on the south side, one in the west suburbs, and then underneath the port district, you would see what you see is something called the Chicago South Cargo Multiplex. On the far right, you see the state of Illinois controls the land in South Suburban Airport, footprint incorporated Will County at the bottom. This is all engineered and fueled by foreign trade zone number 22. Okay. So in essence, what you have on this slide here is that the port district would run it through the city and the state. It's the perfect vehicle to do so. Okay. One of the things that I'm looking at the port district or the port location is that it's being held in decay. They should really look at that location and really sink billions of dollars into that to reformat that and not let that thing fall apart. Because if we get that done right, and right now they only ship in commodities, you know, they send in steel and corn and copper and all that. But if they were to modify that to include freight cargo movement, you've got the St. Lawrence Seaway to the east, okay. You got the Mississippi River to the west by way of the Illinois River, and you have full access to the south going all the way down to Houston, and Miami going to the east by way of the Gulf of Mexico. It's a make sense idea that's well overdue for its time. Okay. It takes ingenuity to do that.
So bottom line, we've given a lot of data, a lot of information to people who need to understand what's going on. Going to be sending out this videotape to our favorite governor and our senator and say, hey, we need to make this happen. And we don't have a lot of time. I got my daughter at 15 say, hey, she's going to need to make some things happen over the next 20, 30 years. So we need to make this done.
Yeah, I've got a daughter who's in education. She's 37 as of this past Saturday, but I've got 4 grandchildren that are growing up too. Okay. And so my whole thing is to make certain that I leave a survivable economy for them long after I'm gone. And so that's the issue. We got to think about our children and our grandchildren. We got to leave the opportunities better for them than we got.
And we're talking about creating a legacy.
Yes, we do.
Right now we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar situation that can be done here in Illinois throughout what we need in terms of cargo and all the other things that can be executed across the country.
Correct, absolutely. And we have the leadership here to get it done. You know, I know the governor's a big idea person. I know that Congresswoman Robin Kelly has been instrumental in still pushing the South Suburban Airport. And we have our county leadership both at Cook County and Will County that will be intrinsic in that. The beautiful thing about this, though, that I must emphasize, when people talk about development projects, they talk about the indirect economic impact. And that's okay. That's like osmosis. If you're going to go outside and it rains and you have raindrops that hit on you, that's kind of indirect. But I'm saying direct benefits that they would actually get, because now they would have an apparatus that they can basically kind of attach fees of production and usury that would benefit the state and other locales. It's a totally different process than saying, okay, I'm going to be over here, so, oh, no, it's raining over there, so I got to get over here while it's raining so I can catch some raindrops. No, they would have direct benefit from this. Direct benefits for the state, the city of Chicago, and Southland municipalities, indirect benefits for other municipality and governmental agencies just as well.
So again, this is sitting on the Chicagoland area. We got our new mayor here who's definitely looking for more ideas. How do they contact you to make this thing execute?
They can contact me at my email address, which is A as in apple, Penn is my last name, PENN, at obsidian-consulting.net, or they can contact me at my office at 312-473-0775, or they can contact me on my mobile, 312-256-7185.
See, so we got the data here. So right now, so when do we ink the deal? I mean, that's the bottom line here. What do we get at? Is a few $1 billion?
Listen, I don't try to talk about what I get out of it. I'm trying to develop something for the region where the region continues to grow and will benefit my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren.
Okay, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking one day I'm probably going to have some grandkids at some point.
I'm sure you will.
I'm telling you, she's 15, so hey, look, she can wait on that. I'll give you another 30 years.
There you
then
go.
I'll look for a grandkid.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear
So
you.
it's life. We try to make things happen. We try to do it the right way. I appreciate your information.